The transport ship was small and old. It had seen better days, with dents along its hull and paint that had faded to a dull gray. But it flew well enough, and that was all Commander Elias needed. He sat alone in the pilot's seat, watching through the viewport as the neutral station grew larger against the black of space. Neutral Station 7 was massive. It hung in the void like a metal flower, its 8 arms stretching out in all directions. Lights blinked along its surface in patterns that meant nothing to human eyes. This was territory, built by hands, run by laws. And in a few minutes, Elias would walk into it carrying nothing but a data tablet and the clothes on his back. His communication device crackled. "Commander, this is Station Control. You are cleared for Docking Bay 7. Power down all weapons systems before landing." Elias smiled to himself. "Station Control, I have no weapon systems to power down. My ship is unarmed." There was a long pause. When the voice returned, it carried a note of confusion. "Confirm, human vessel, you carry no weapons." "Confirmed, no weapons of any kind." Another pause, longer this time. "Proceed to Docking Bay 7. The landing was smooth. Elias had always been a good pilot, even back in his early days with the Terran fleet. He had flown combat missions, cargo runs, and diplomatic escorts, but he had never done anything quite like this. No human had. They did not negotiate. They conquered. They demanded. They took what they wanted with powers that made human technology look like children's toys. And yet here he was, about to walk into their station alone. The airlock cycled with a hiss of pressure. Elias stood, straightened his simple gray uniform, and picked up his data tablet. He took one deep breath, held it, then let it out slowly. This was it. Everything he had worked for over the past 2 years came down to the next few hours. The airlock door opened, and he stepped through. The docking bay was huge, big enough to hold a dozen ships the size of his own. But it was empty except for a small group waiting near the far wall. Elias counted 6 figures, all of them. They were tall, taller than humans by half a meter at least. Their skin was a deep blue-gray, smooth like stone. Each of them had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on their faces, and their hands ended in 3 long fingers that could bend in ways human fingers could not. Elias walked toward them, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. He kept his pace steady, neither too fast nor too slow. He knew they were watching him, studying him, probably reaching out with their psychic abilities to read whatever they could from his surface thoughts. He had trained for this. He was ready. The one in front was female, judging by the slight differences in bone structure that Elias had learned to recognize from his studies. She wore robes of deep purple, the color of diplomacy. Her 4 eyes tracked his approach without blinking. "I am Ambassador Han," she said when he stopped a few meters away. Her voice carried strange harmonic undertones, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. "I speak for the Dominion in these negotiations." Elias inclined his head in the gesture of respect. "I am Commander Elias. I speak for the Terran Cooperative. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Han's upper eyes narrowed slightly. "We agreed to nothing. We permitted you to come. There is a difference." "Of course," Elias said. "I appreciate the permission." One of the others stepped forward. He was larger than the others, with scars marking his face and arms. A warrior, Elias guessed, maybe a general. "You brought no weapons," the warrior said. His voice was deeper than Han's, rougher. "No guards, no armor, just yourself and that small device." Elias held up the data tablet. "This contains information relevant to our discussions, nothing more." "You are either very brave or very stupid," the warrior said. "Perhaps both," Elias replied. "Time will tell." Han made a small gesture and the warrior stepped back. "You know what we are," she said to Elias. "You know what we can do. We have conquered 17 worlds. Our psychic warriors can stop hearts from across a battlefield. We can crush metal with our thoughts, shatter bones without touching them. And you walk into our station alone." "I do." "Why?" Elias considered the question carefully. He had prepared many answers, rehearsed many speeches. But looking at Han now, seeing the genuine curiosity beneath her mask of contempt, he decided on honesty. Because bringing weapons would not have helped me. If you wanted me dead, I would be dead regardless of what I carried, so I left them behind. They would only have gotten in the way. Han studied him for a long moment. Then she turned and began walking toward a door at the far end of the bay. "Follow," she said. "We will talk in the meeting chamber." The meeting chamber was circular, with a high ceiling that disappeared into shadow. A round table sat in the center, surrounded by chairs designed for bodies. Elias found them uncomfortable, but he did not complain. He sat where he was directed and placed his data tablet on the table in front of him. Han sat across from him. The other arranged themselves around the room, some sitting, some standing. All of them watched Elias with unblinking eyes. "We are here to discuss the belt," Han began. "Your Terran cooperative has expressed interest in mining rights to several asteroids in the region. These asteroids are within space." "They are within disputed space," Elias corrected gently. "The border was never formally established after the Accords." "We do not recognize the Accords." "I know, that is part of why we are here." Han leaned back in her chair. "You humans are new to this region of space. You have only been traveling between stars for what, 300 years? We have ruled this sector for 2,000. You would do well to remember that." "I remember it constantly," Elias said. "Your history is impressive. Your achievements are remarkable. The temples on Prime alone are considered some of the greatest architectural works in known space." Something shifted in Han's expression. It was subtle, just a slight relaxation of the muscles around her eyes. Elias had surprised her. She had expected him to argue, to push back, to defend humanity's position. Instead, he had offered a compliment. It was a small thing, but small things mattered in negotiations. "You have studied us," she said. "Extensively. Your culture, your history, your biology, your philosophy. I find it fascinating." "Why?" "Because understanding leads to better outcomes for everyone. I am not here to fight you, Ambassador. I am here to talk." The warrior made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Talk. That is what the weak do when they cannot fight." Elias turned to look at him. "What is your name?" The warrior blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I am General, Commander of the Third Fleet." "General, may I ask you something?" Glanced at Han, who gave a slight nod. "Ask," he said. "In all your conquests, all your wars, what has been the most difficult enemy to defeat?" The general considered the question. He said finally, "They fought us for 60 years before we broke them." "And what made them so difficult?" "They would not surrender. No matter how many we killed, no matter how many worlds we took, they kept fighting. Every victory cost us more than it was worth." Elias nodded. "And are they still a threat today?" "No, they are gone, extinct." "All of them?" "All of them." Elias let that hang in the air for a moment. "So your greatest victory was the complete destruction of an enemy species. And what did that victory cost you?" His eyes hardened. "That is not your concern." "I think it is," Elias said quietly. "Because I believe that victory cost you more than you realize. And I believe the same pattern has repeated itself in different ways across all your conquests." Han leaned forward. "Explain yourself." Elias pulled up data on his tablet and projected it into the air above the table. Numbers and graphs appeared, hovering where everyone could see them. "These are population figures for the Dominion over the past 500 years. Do you see the trend?" The in the room studied the projections. The numbers told a clear story. 500 years ago, the population had been growing steadily, but over time that growth had slowed, stopped, and in the last 200 years it had begun to decline. "Where did you get this data?" Han demanded. "Public records mostly. Census data from your outer colonies, trade reports, medical journals published by your own scientists. The information is not secret, Ambassador. It is simply not discussed. These numbers are wrong. They are not, and you know they are not. You have seen the same reports. Your own scientists have been raising alarms for decades, but no one wants to listen because the truth is uncomfortable. Han stood abruptly. This meeting is over. You will return to your ship and leave this station. Elias did not move. Ambassador, please. I am not here to insult you or expose your weaknesses. I am here because I believe we can help each other. Help, laughed bitterly. What help can humans offer us? That depends, Elias said. It depends on whether you are willing to listen. I know your history. I know your pride. I know that for 2,000 years they have taken what they wanted and crushed anyone who stood in their way. But I also know that your empire is dying, not from external enemies but from within. And I believe that if we work together, we can find a way to change that. The room was silent. Han remained standing, her four eyes fixed on Elias with an intensity that would have made most humans look away. But Elias met her gaze calmly. You are either mad, she said finally, or you are the most dangerous human I have ever met. As I said before, perhaps both. Han slowly sat back down. Continue, she said, but choose your next words very carefully, Commander. They may be your last. Elias nodded and took a breath. The first part of his plan had worked. He had their attention. Now came the hard part. The meeting continued for 6 hours. Elias spoke and listened, asked questions and answered them. He did not argue or push back when the maid demands. He did not threaten or bluster. He simply talked, calmly and patiently, about trade routes and resources and the challenges of running an interstellar empire. They found this strange. They were used to enemies who shouted and threatened, who made bold claims and desperate offers. They were not used to someone who simply wanted to understand them. It made them uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people often revealed more than they intended. By the end of the first day, Elias had learned a great deal. The Dominion was indeed struggling. Their psychokinetic abilities, which had made them unstoppable in war, were fading with each generation. Fewer and fewer children were born with the gift. Scientists could not explain why, though they had theories involving genetic drift and lack of diversity. The conquered races that made up most of the Dominion's population had no psychic abilities at all, so they could not help replenish the bloodlines. More than that, the Dominion's economy was stagnating. Conquest required constant expansion, but there were no more easy targets. The species that remained independent were either too far away, too well defended, or simply not worth the cost. And the conquered worlds, stripped of their best minds and most ambitious workers, produced less and less with each passing year. They were not stupid. They knew their empire had problems, but their culture had no framework for solving problems through cooperation. Everything was about dominance, about strength, about taking what you needed. The idea of asking for help, of admitting weakness, was unthinkable. As Elias returned to his quarters that night, he allowed himself a small smile. The first day had gone well. They had not killed him, which was a good start. More importantly, they had talked, really talked, not just made demands. And in their words, in their silences, in the things they did not say, Elias had found what he was looking for. A way in. He did not sleep much that night. Instead, he sat in his small room, reviewing his notes, refining his approach. The next few weeks would be crucial. He had to build trust slowly, carefully. One wrong step and everything would fall apart. But he was patient. He had spent 2 years preparing for this moment. He could wait a little longer. The second day of negotiations began much like the first. They sat in the circular chamber. They discussed mining rights and trade agreements, and they accomplished very little of practical value. But Elias was not interested in practical value, not yet. He was interested in relationships. He asked Han about her family, her home world, her training as a diplomat. At first she refused to answer, dismissing his questions as irrelevant. But Elias persisted, gently, and eventually she began to open up. She told him about the Academy of Speakers, where Young learned the arts of negotiation and persuasion. She told him about her first assignment, a minor trade dispute that she had resolved so skillfully she was promoted 3 levels in a single year. "You must have been very proud," Elias said. Han's expression was hard to read. Pride is for warriors, speakers serve. "But surely you take satisfaction in your work." "Satisfaction is also for others. I do what is required." Elias nodded slowly. "That sounds lonely." Han said nothing, but something flickered in her lower eyes, something that might have been recognition. The days stretched into weeks. Elias met with different officials, attended formal dinners, observed religious ceremonies. He learned the names of all the guards who watched him, asked about their families, remembered details from previous conversations. They did not know what to make of him. He was not like any human they had expected. Han watched him carefully. She reported everything to the high command, every conversation, every question, every strange human behavior. The command grew impatient. Why was this human still here? What did he want? Why would he not simply make his demands so they could reject them and be done with it? But Han had begun to suspect something. The human was not here for mining rights. He was here for something else entirely, something larger, and she was determined to find out what it was. 3 weeks after his arrival, she made her move. The knock on Elias' door came late at night. He opened it to find Han standing in the corridor, flanked by 4 warriors. Their faces were hard, their hands raised slightly in the gesture that used before unleashing their psychic attacks. "Commander," Han said, "you will come with us." Elias looked at the warriors, then back at Han. "May I ask where we are going?" "The High Command has grown tired of waiting. They have ordered us to extract the truth from you directly." "I see." Elias stepped into the corridor, making no move to resist. "Lead the way." They walked through empty halls, deeper and deeper into the station. The temperature dropped. The lights grew dim. Finally, they reached a door that looked different from the others, heavier, older. Han placed her hand on a panel and the door slid open. The room beyond was small and bare. A single chair sat in the center, surrounded by 6 in dark robes. Their eyes were closed, their bodies swaying slightly. These were mind readers, Elias realized. The strongest psychics the Dominion had. "Sit," Han commanded. Elias sat. The chair was cold and hard. He placed his hands on his knees and waited. The mind readers opened their eyes, all 24 of them focusing on Elias at once. He felt pressure against his thoughts, like fingers pressing on the surface of water. They were reaching for him, trying to find a way in. Elias closed his eyes and breathed. In and out, in and out. He let his thoughts become still like a pond with no wind. The pressure increased, became almost painful, but the surface held. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one of the mind readers made a sound of frustration. Another one swore in the language. They pushed harder and harder still, but they found nothing they could grip. Han stepped forward. "What is happening?" The lead mind reader shook his head. "We cannot reach him. His mind is there, we can sense it, but we cannot enter. It is like trying to grasp smoke." "That is impossible. No species can resist our psychics." "And yet this one does." Han turned to look at Elias, who had opened his eyes and was watching her calmly. "How are you doing this?" she demanded. "It is an old technique," Elias said. "My people developed it thousands of years ago, long before we traveled to the stars. We call it meditation." "Meditation cannot stop our abilities." "Normally, no, but I have trained extensively. 6 months with masters who have spent their entire lives learning to quiet the mind. It is not magic, ambassador. It is simply practice." Han stared at him. The mind readers were whispering among themselves, confused and angry. No one had ever resisted them before. It was not supposed to be possible. And that was when Elias made his move. Ambassador, he said quietly, I have not been entirely honest with you about why I am here. The room went silent. I know, you were never interested in the belt. No, the belt is meaningless. We have more resources than we know what to do with. I came here for a different reason. What reason? Elias stood slowly, keeping his hands visible. I came here to understand you, to learn everything I could about the Dominion, your strengths, your weaknesses, your hopes and your fears, and I have learned a great deal, Ambassador, more than you realize. You are a spy. No, a spy gathers information and keeps it secret. Everything I have learned has been transmitted back to the Terran Cooperative. My government knows everything I know. If you kill me now, you will gain nothing because the information is already gone. Han's eyes widened. You would not dare. I already have. The transmissions have been ongoing since my first day here. They know about your population decline. They know about the failing psychic abilities. They know about the economic stagnation and the unrest in the outer colonies. They know that the Dominion, for all its power and glory, is dying from within. The warriors raised their hands, ready to strike, but Han held up a hand, stopping them. Why, she asked, why would you tell me this? If what you say is true, you have just signed your own death warrant. Elias smiled. Because I am not here to threaten you, Ambassador. I am here to help you, and I could not help you until you understood something important. What? That your old way of doing things will not work anymore. Conquest will not save you. Domination will not save you. The only path forward is one you have never tried before. And what path is that? Elias took a deep breath. This was the moment everything depended on. Cooperation, he said. The word hung in the air like a foreign thing. Han stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she did not understand, and in a way he had. We did not come here to fight you, Elias continued. We came here to offer you something your entire history has never provided, a way out that does not require someone to lose, a partnership not between master and slave, but between equals. Equals had entered the room, his face twisted with disbelief. You dare to call yourselves our equals? We have conquered 17 worlds. We have ruled this sector for 2,000 years. What have humans done? We have survived, Elias said simply. Our species has faced extinction more times than I can count. Wars, plagues, famines, disasters. We have nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times over, but we are still here. Do you know why? Because you breed like vermin. Because we learn to work together. Not always and not perfectly. We still fight among ourselves. We still make mistakes. But when things get truly bad, when extinction stares us in the face, we find a way to cooperate. It is the only reason we have lasted this long. He turned to Han. Your empire is facing extinction, Ambassador. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And you cannot conquer your way out of it. There is no enemy to defeat, no world to take, no resource to seize that will solve this problem. The only solution is to change, to try something new, to learn from species who have faced similar challenges and survived. And you think humans can teach us this? I think we can learn from each other. Humanity has knowledge and perspectives that could help stabilize your population. New genetic techniques, social structures, economic models. And you have things we need as well. Your technology, your experience, your understanding of this region of space. Together, we could accomplish things that neither of us could do alone. Han was quiet for a long time. The mind readers had stopped trying to penetrate Elias' thoughts. The warriors had lowered their hands, even seemed uncertain, his anger giving way to something more complex. The High Command will never agree to this, Han said finally. I know, Elias replied. That is not who I am trying to convince. Then who? Elias looked around the room, at the warriors and the mind readers, and the diplomat who had never been allowed to truly negotiate. You, he said, all of you. the ones who see the truth but cannot speak it, the ones who know your empire is failing but have no power to change it. The High Command does not have to agree, they just have to become irrelevant. You are suggesting treason. I am suggesting survival. There is a difference. Han stood very still, her 4 eyes unreadable. Elias could not tell what she was thinking. He had played his hand, shown his cards, revealed his plan. Everything now depended on her. The silence stretched on. And then slowly Han turned to the warriors. "Leave us," she said. Began to protest. "Ambassador, the command ordered us to." "I know what they ordered. I am countermanding that order. Leave us." The warriors hesitated, but something in Han's voice brooked no argument. One by one they filed out of the room. The mind readers followed. Finally, only Han and Elias remained. "You are either the bravest human I have ever met," Han said, "or the most foolish." "Perhaps both," Elias said. It was becoming something of a catchphrase. Han studied him for a long moment. Then she did something Elias had not expected. She laughed. It was a strange sound, rusty with disuse but genuine. "Sit down, Commander," she said. "We have much to discuss, and I believe it is going to be a very long night." Elias sat. Outside the room, the station hummed with the quiet sounds of a sleeping empire, but inside, something new was beginning. The second part of his plan had worked. Now came the hardest part of all. The months that followed were difficult. Han returned to her duties, pretending that nothing had changed. Elias continued his charade of negotiating for mining rights, making slow progress on terms that neither side particularly cared about. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. Information began to flow. Quietly, carefully, through channels that left no trace. The truth about the Dominion's decline reached those who needed to hear it, the scientists and doctors and teachers who had long suspected but never confirmed. And with the truth came something else, something dangerous. Hope. The High Command noticed nothing at first. They were busy with other matters, border disputes and resource allocations and the endless bureaucracy of empire. A single human diplomat was beneath their attention. "Let him talk," they said. "Let him waste his time on meaningless negotiations." When they grew bored of him, they would send him home and take whatever they wanted anyway. But Elias was patient. He had not come here expecting quick results. He had come here to plant seeds that would take years to grow. And he had learned, in his studies of human history, that the most powerful changes often began with the smallest actions. A question asked in the right moment. A piece of information shared with the right person. A connection made between strangers who discovered they were not as alone as they had believed. These were the weapons Elias had brought. Not guns or bombs or ships of war, but ideas. And ideas, as he knew very well, were far more dangerous. The young were the first to respond. Those born without psychic abilities, considered worthless by their society, began to seek out human information channels. They learned about genetic treatments that might help stabilize their declining population. They learned about social structures that did not depend on psychic dominance. They learned that there were other ways to live, other ways to matter, other ways to be valuable. And they began to talk among themselves. Elias watched from a distance, careful not to push too hard or move too fast. The seeds had been planted. Now he had to trust that they would grow. And so he waited and he planned and he prepared for the day when everything would change. That day was coming soon. He could feel it. The transmission came on a night when the station systems were running routine maintenance. Most of the population was asleep, and the corridors were quiet. Elias sat alone in his quarters, reading reports on his data tablet when the device buzzed with an incoming message. He looked at the sender identification and felt his heart quicken. It was from Earth, from the Terran Cooperative's Central Command, and it contained a single word. "Proceed." Elias closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had been waiting for this authorization for 3 months. Now that it had come, he felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. What he was about to do would change everything. For humanity, for the entire sector. There was no going back. He stood, put on his simple gray uniform, and walked out into the corridor. It was time to see Han. It was time to tell her the rest of his plan. It was time to begin. The corridor outside Han's quarters was empty. No guards, no surveillance, no witnesses. This had been arranged weeks ago, through careful manipulation of duty rosters and maintenance schedules. Elias knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more, the signal they had agreed upon. The door opened. Han stood in the dim light, her 4 eyes glowing faintly. She wore no robes, just simple clothing that Elias had never seen before. She looked tired, older somehow, the weight of recent months showing in her face. "It is time," she asked. "It is time." She nodded slowly. "Then come in. We have much to discuss before morning." Elias stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small dramas of mortal beings. But somewhere among those stars, something was changing, something that would echo through the centuries to come. The human had brought no weapons, just a plan. And now that plan was about to unfold. 5 years passed. It did not happen quickly. Nothing worthwhile ever did. But slowly, steadily, the Dominion began to transform, and Elias watched it all from a distance that grew smaller with each passing month. The young ones moved first, as he had predicted. Those without psychic abilities, the ones their society called worthless, began seeking out human enclaves in the border regions. They came quietly, in small groups, traveling through routes that avoided official checkpoints. Some came for the medical treatments that human scientists had developed, genetic therapies that might stabilize the drift in DNA. Others came for something less tangible but equally important. They came for hope. The human settlements welcomed them. There were tensions at first, misunderstandings and cultural clashes, and moments when everything nearly fell apart. Humans had been enemies for so long that trust did not come easily, but Elias had prepared for this. He had spent years studying both species, identifying the common ground that existed beneath their differences. Both valued family, though they defined it in different ways. Both honored courage, though they expressed it through different actions. Both feared extinction, and both wanted their children to have better lives than they had known. These shared values became the foundation for something new, a bridge between two peoples who had never imagined they could be anything but enemies. The High Command noticed what was happening, of course. They sent patrols to intercept the refugees. They threatened punishment for any who abandoned the Dominion. They made speeches about loyalty and duty and the sacred traditions of their people. But the refugees kept coming. And gradually, the nature of the exodus changed. It was no longer just the powerless who left. Scientists began to defect, bringing their knowledge of technology. Engineers followed, then doctors, then teachers. Each one who left made it easier for the next one to follow. Each one who found a better life in the human settlements sent word back to those still trapped in the Dominion. The trickle became a stream. The stream became a flood. Han remained in her position, officially loyal to the High Command, secretly working to accelerate the change. She fed information to Elias through encrypted channels. She protected sympathizers within the bureaucracy. She made sure that the refugees' routes remained open, even as the command tried desperately to close them. It was dangerous work. If she was discovered, her death would be slow and painful. But she had made her choice years ago in that small room where Elias had revealed his plan. She had chosen hope over fear, change over stagnation, the future over the past. She had chosen, for the first time in her life, to believe that things could be different. Elias traveled constantly during these years. He visited the human settlements where refugees had found new homes. He attended conferences where scientists from both species worked together on solutions to the genetic decline. He met with leaders on both sides, building relationships, solving problems, keeping the fragile alliance from falling apart. He aged faster than he should have. The stress wore on him, leaving lines on his face and gray in his hair. There were nights when he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake, if his plan would ultimately cause more harm than good. But then he would see a child learning to read human languages, or a human doctor treating a patient, and he would remember why he had started this. Some things were worth the cost. The breaking point came in the 5th year. The High Command, desperate to stop the hemorrhaging of their population, issued an ultimatum. All who had defected were to return immediately or face execution. Any human settlement harboring refugees would be considered an act of war. The Dominion's fleets were mobilized, their psychic warriors prepared for battle. It was exactly what Elias had been waiting for. The response came not from human governments but from within the Dominion itself. In a single coordinated action, half of the command's military forces refused to move. Officers who had been secretly sympathetic to the refugees revealed themselves. Ships that were supposed to attack human settlements turned their weapons on loyalist vessels instead. It was not a war. There was no grand battle, no decisive victory. It was something simpler and more profound. It was a choice, made by thousands of individuals who decided, at the same moment, that they would no longer serve an empire that had lost its way. The High Command collapsed in a matter of weeks. Some of its members fled to the outer territories, hoping to rebuild their power base. Others were captured and put on trial. A few chose death rather than face the new reality they had helped create. And in the chaos that followed, something new began to emerge. Han was instrumental in shaping what came next. She had spent years preparing for this moment, building networks of reformers and moderates who could step into the power vacuum. Under her guidance, the Old Dominion restructured itself, becoming something that had no name in the language. A partnership. Not a conquest, not a submission, but a genuine collaboration between equals. The human territories and the worlds formed the Cooperative Alliance, a new political entity that drew on the strengths of both species. Human innovation combined with experience. Human adaptability combined with discipline. Human hope combined with endurance. It was not perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still those who resisted on both sides, who clung to the old ways and the old hatreds. There were mistakes and setbacks and moments when the whole experiment seemed on the verge of collapse, but it held. Against all odds, against all expectations, it held. Elias did not live to see the full flowering of what he had planted. The years of stress had taken their toll, and his health began to fail in the 7th year after his arrival on station. He spent his final months in a small house on one of the border worlds, surrounded by friends from both species, watching the sunrise paint the alien sky in colors he had never seen on Earth. Han visited him often during those final months. They would sit together in the garden, two old friends who had once been enemies, and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, content to share each other's company. On the last day, Han found him in his chair by the window, his eyes closed, his face peaceful. She knew before she touched him that he was gone. She stood beside him for a long time, her 4 eyes wet with tears she had never learned to shed as a diplomat. Then she went outside and told the others. The funeral was attended by thousands, humans, and stood together, mourning a man who had changed their worlds. There were speeches and ceremonies, and all the formal rituals that sentient beings used to mark the passing of their great ones. But Han did not speak. She had said everything she needed to say to Elias while he lived. Instead, she stood in silence and remembered. She remembered the day a small human ship had landed on Station 7, carrying a single passenger with no weapons and no fear. She remembered the confusion she had felt, the contempt, the certainty that this strange creature would soon learn the price of his arrogance. She remembered reaching for his thoughts and finding nothing she could grip, just stillness, just calm, just an ocean of patience that seemed to have no bottom. She remembered the moment she had realized that everything she believed about strength and weakness was wrong. The humans had a word for what Elias had done. They called it diplomacy, but Han knew it was something more than that. It was a kind of warfare, perhaps the most effective kind there was. A warfare of ideas instead of weapons, of understanding instead of conquest, of building bridges instead of burning them. It was the human way. And now, thanks to one remarkable man, it was becoming the way as well. In the years that followed, historians would debate Elias' legacy. Some called him a savior, the man who had prevented a devastating war between two great powers. Others called him a manipulator, someone who had undermined a proud civilization through deception and trickery. The truth, as Han knew, was more complicated than either story allowed. Elias had not saved thee or conquered them. He had offered them a choice, a different way of seeing themselves and their place in the universe. What they did with that choice was up to them. And they had chosen well. The cooperative alliance grew stronger with each passing decade. New species joined, drawn by the promise of partnership rather than domination. The old traditions evolved, incorporating human ideas without abandoning their own heritage. The genetic decline was halted, then reversed, as scientists from both species worked together on solutions that neither could have found alone. It was not a perfect society. There was still conflict, still inequality, still all the problems that came with bringing different peoples together. But there was also something new, something that had not existed before. There was hope. Han lived to see the 100th anniversary of the Alliance's founding. By then, she was very old, the last surviving member of the generation that had witnessed its birth. She spent her final years telling stories to the young ones, both human and who came to learn about the past. They always asked the same question: how did it start? How did two species who had been enemies for so long learn to live together? And she always gave the same answer. It started with a human who brought no weapons, just a plan. She would pause then, letting the words sink in. The young ones would lean forward, eager to hear more. And she would smile, remembering Elias' face, remembering his patience and his courage and his unwavering belief that change was possible. The plan was simple, she would tell them, but it took a lifetime to complete. It started with a question, asked to an enemy who had never been questioned before. It grew with every conversation, every connection, every small moment of understanding between people who had been taught to hate each other. It was not about defeating she would explain. It was about showing them a different way, a better way, a way that did not require conquest or domination or the endless cycle of violence that had defined their history for 2,000 years. The human brought no weapons, she would finish, because he did not need any. He understood something that we had forgotten. The strongest force in the universe is not psychic power or military might or technological superiority. The strongest force in the universe is an idea whose time has come. The young ones would nod solemnly, and Han would look out the window at the stars she had spent her life studying. Out there, scattered across 1,000 worlds, humans and a dozen other species were building something together, something that would last. Elias had not lived to see it, but he had known, somehow, that it would happen. He had bet his life on a plan that depended on trust and patience and the belief that people could change. And he had been right. Han closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She was tired now, tired in ways that went beyond physical exhaustion, but she was also at peace. She had seen the impossible become possible. She had watched enemies become friends, strangers become family. She had lived long enough to see the plan succeed. The human had brought no weapons, just a plan. And with that plan, he had changed the universe.